So we had a question and answer session recently. I think it was on Saturday. And the one question that arose was the question of sacrifice, or what we call in Sanskrit yajna. And so I thought, well, it's a subject we could delve into a little deeper, using the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which specifically has a section dedicated to the subject. But of course, as with all our interactions, we can also make this question answer session, since we can be as interactive as we like. So what that means is that you're free to interrupt the flow of the talk if a talk develops, and ask clarifications, questions, etc. So thinking about this subject, I think the term sacrifice is a much misunderstood subject. And so if we were to define what is sacrifice, we think maybe of such things in ancient times as animal sacrifices to gods, or we can think of a self-sacrificing kind of individual, or we can think of an element of renunciation or discipline. And in Christianity, we could think maybe of the supreme sacrifice of giving your own life, that level of self-sacrifice. And what would be the basis of such a thing? So we can delve into that. And then, of course, we can delve into also the subject of yajna. And I think on Saturday I had touched on the subject. I was saying that because fire is one of the most outstanding discoveries of mankind, without the fundamental discovery of fire that our ancestors had, we don't know when, but earliest cave paintings, abstract paintings on cave walls, go back probably around about 50,000 years. And we probably know that we were lighting fires maybe 1 million years ago, or close to that. So why would we want to do that, and how did we discover fire? That much we don't know, except that fire is a very difficult thing to generate. Anybody who's gone camping will know the most difficult thing is trying to light a fire. And so we can have many kinds of different devices to do that. Nowadays, of course, the easiest thing is strike a match, but if your matches are wet, it doesn't work. So we always have to make sure that our matches are nice and dry. What are our matches? Our intellectual insight, our capacity to reason, and our capacity to feel our way when truth is driving us forward from within. So regardless of the culture that we find, we'll always see this aspect of sacrifice. Biblically, we'll remember how Abraham was asked to sacrifice his only son. And then that event gets replayed in Jesus' life. And so the Son of God, in that Christian theology, also is sacrificed, is the sacrificial lamb. At the Feast of Passover, religious Jews, conscientious Jews would go to the temple courtyard, the second temple which was there, and there they would purchase a lamb, and the lamb would be a way of offering something, knowing that God doesn't really want the lamb, but it's our expression, it's our way of giving some offering and recalling the Exodus in this case. So blood is involved. Along comes Buddha, let's say 2,500 odd years ago, who didn't like this animal sacrifice. And when he heard about it, He said, you'd want the best, I'm paraphrasing no doubt, you'd want the best sacrifice, wouldn't you? The best for the Almighty God? Yes. Well, then you think I'm the best, why don't you sacrifice me? You can kill me and offer me. Now that small story tells two things. Firstly, the willingness on behalf of a perfect man, the willingness to sacrifice a mortal life. Again, the self-sacrifice that we see, let's say 500 years later, with Jesus on the cross. And then, all saints and sages and holy people are dedicated to the service of humanity, sacrificing their own life. In fact, sannyas is really for that purpose, that you say, well, maybe there are many lives, I'll take one of them and dedicate it toward the whole of humanity. And so the color of fire is put on, that represents this shaving off, this mundaka, shaven head is also there. And in Europe, of course, a colder climate, they had the same kind of symbolism, but the monks and nuns, they had a small tonsha, a small circle out of their head of hair, and then a cap to keep it warm. And even the Pope today has that cap still, symbolizing something that will cover the tonsure. So to shave off, in other words, to do away with worldliness, not the world itself though. The Bhagavad Gita begins with a subject about all this action. What action should I take? What should I not take? What should be virtuous? What is not virtuous? What is the correct moral way? In light of the fact that somebody's job is fighting in a war, a just war, no doubt. A war different from modern warfare, with no civilian getting involved, other than the kin or the wife or wives of the military people, but otherwise those not dedicated to this line of work were left out of it. Soldier fighting soldier on a battlefield with rules of chivalry and start and stop times and so on and so forth. Nothing underhand, normally speaking, and no activity when the sun goes down and when the sun rises between that time. The only activity was spies were allowed to go into the other person's camp if they can get away with it and try to find out what tomorrow's strategic planning is. Just that much. So in the light of a warfare where it's a difficult circumstance, as you know, and Arjun is there, the superb archer, nobody can touch him in warfare, master of the weapons, with no fear about warfare whatsoever, doing your duty. Of course, a lot of people misunderstand this Mahabharata, say, you're encouraging war. Not at all. We're encouraging you're doing your duty. And what your duty is based on your skills, your talents, and where you're placed in life. And with that, you do it for what purpose? For the welfare of humanity. So that any action that has a selfless motive to it, or no motive, we could say, because all action that has a motive will principally be essentially selfish, mostly. So when you take off this ego from the whole equation, then what's the purpose? Should we not just sit down and avoid an awkward situation? Sit down and do nothing? Well, no. That's the whole purpose of Krishna's message. Get up and do. To do nothing would be a disaster. So then, what is the whole subject of yoga? Because 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita there, all called yoga of this, yoga of that. And the first chapter, of course, begins with depression. And so those who are depressed, we say, congratulations, you have taken the first step. It's not to be, distant or not empathetic to the person who's suffering this depression. On the contrary, we attend to it. But how do we attend to it? By pointing out that within us is an area, if you want to express it like that, of infinite possibilities. And the infinite possibilities comes to a singular Atman, a self, an internal self. It is immortal, it is undying, as I say, it is not made from many parts. Water cannot wet it, fire cannot burn it, wind cannot dry it. This is the expression that is used. And Krishna is immediately telling Arjuna, this is your fundamental nature. Is it a lesson that we can tell everybody? Yes, in our own way, knowing that some will accept it and some will not. But at least we can try. We can express it in different ways. Positive thinkers in modern times will say, you have infinite possibilities in you. They will say a little erroneously and mythically, you're only using a certain percentage of your brain. They'll express it in this way and that way, suggesting that your potential is much more than you assumed it would be. Now, you know, in yoga exercise, when you get into a posture, if you have the right teacher, the teacher will say, I'm sure you're doing the minimum, and you've interpreted it as the maximum, and cautiously you can just stretch just a half, a quarter inch more. And you'll see, because the teacher can see the capacity in the student and not damage the student. And the student will have a remarkable discovery. Oh yes, I can stretch just that quarter inch more, just that little bit more. Yes, I can do it. So all knowledge is within us already, and Swami Vivekananda was keen to point this out. Sister Nivedita also was keen to point this out, that all our learning, all our knowledge is already within us, coiled up as it were, and has to be uncoiled. So to discover our full potential will be the purpose and meaning of the whole of life. We can imagine it also like the internal nucleus of a cell. You know, if you take one small, tiny hair, invisible to the naked eye, chop it into 1,000 pieces, put one under the electron microscope, and investigate the nucleus of the cell, there you'll find this vast library of information called deoxyribonucleic acid, made from various nucleic acids and proteins. And there you'll see all the coiled up information using only 4 codes with so many infinite combinations, and all directed in a certain way, unless we interfere with it, or unless nature itself interferes with it, called epigenetics. So all this internal engineering is going on, and we are completely oblivious to it, totally oblivious to it. But the idea is that our potential is coiled up somewhere and can be tapped into and uncoiled, either suddenly or bit by bit. For most people, bit by bit is enough, progressively. It's called spirituality and spiritual life. But where would we start? We'd start by whittling away any self-interest, any action that is examined to be selfish will be damaging to us. That we have to clearly understand. There's no merit in it. So let's rephrase then. Many of you went to work today. Rephrase it, please. Many of you did karma yoga today, but mostly people did karma. What's the difference? People did action, and the action normally with a future orientation, or stimulated either by fear or desire. These are 2 polar opposites. You desire something because you fear something else. Let's take a simple example to do with your personality. Sometimes you fear rejection, and therefore you desire acceptance. Can you see how it works? This is very subtle. And then that will lead to many other things. Until we realize that these 2 things create an ever-going effort that normally ends up in a kind of frustration. It's like a cat discovering its tail for the first time and being frustrated that it never catches it. And once it catches it, it may realize, oh, this is actually me. If I pinch it, it's me. If I scratch it, it's me. If I bite it, it's me. So we have to do a little bit of training. We have to condition our mind with the philosophy that is contained mainly in the Upanishads and persuade ourselves that sacrifice is a way of whittling away the ego. But what do we mean by it? Do we mean the primitive sacrifice, or do we mean self-sacrifice at the highest level, most sophisticated level? And of course, you'll answer the question for me yourselves, based on what we've just said. So then, this effort to acquire our own freedom, this effort to uncoil our potential, is called yoga. And the whole Bhagavad Gita is a book on yoga, 18 chapters, give us 18 kinds of yoga. Sometimes I give people a trick question, how many yogas are there? And they think, and they say, well, there's this, and there's that, and there's the other. And they're thinking there's hot yoga and hatha yoga and all kinds of other things. Or some people say maybe 4 yogas, that is 4 systems, that's fine. But of course, with a twinkle in my eye, I'm suggesting there are at least 18 yogas, since every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called a yoga. So what is yoga? Yoga is the art of staying attuned to the glory of the divine self. The kingdom of heaven being within, that king is there within, that Atman is there within, and hidden, as it were, in the cave of the heart. Now, so this internal, immortal self, it is called God by devout worshippers. There is really no difference. It's only that one, we use that term, the last term, are worshippers and devotees. The others take a different approach, but it doesn't really matter. Take the approach that you want. And we have to also understand that no 2 individuals are quite similar in their tastes and their temperaments. So naturally, people's approaches will differ widely. And particularly, they'll differ at the starting point of what we might call spiritual life. That means we take things a little more seriously. At what point do we do that? It's at that point where we outgrow any external assistance. Now that requires some clarification as well. So we compare it to your education. In the beginning, before you went to school, you accepted everything unquestioningly. Everything was legitimately true. You had no other way of comparing it and examining whether it's true, whether it's not. And then as you develop, you realize that it is important. Reward and punishment are real things. And boundaries and restrictions occur. And then we can make any divine thing a lawgiver of types, some extra cosmic entity that acts like a judge, a lawgiver, somebody that dispenses reward and punishment. We see the Erythro's dilemma in Socrates' discussions. Is it that the moral precepts are always there, and so a God is there to just enact these? Or is it that these were invented, created, and espoused and governed by that God? And it's a catch question, because the irrelevancy is this: such a God, does it exist? That question should be asked first. Is it a God that accepts laws, or a God that creates laws? And what is our response? Nothing of the kind. Neither creating it, nor was there any preordained laws. So what we regard as the laws of nature are just the mechanics of a presence emanating and manifesting, because that being is not a dualistic creator. It is the material and efficient cause. Like as I describe, it's not me, it's the Mundaka Upanishad, which is telling us about the spider and the web. That great example there, where a web is manifested from the spider itself. So naturally, if we take a starting point, we might fall into that reward and punishment mode until we understand, even beyond community religion, if you will, Sunday services, and all the rest of it, that we decide, as we do in our education, that we are not forced to do anything. We now decide voluntarily to take full responsibility for our actions. The 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, as part of its preliminary statements regarding meditation, will tell us that we are your own best friend, your own worst enemy. You can really elevate yourself, your attention, by itself or lower it by itself. It's entirely up to you. You take full responsibility. At that point, there's a level of maturity coming in, and then you start your journey. And if you take Swami Vivekananda's definition of religion, religion is realization, you'll see, you'll get a number of, that's it. When I take the internal journey, sometimes if you're bold enough, like Buddha, no map, no compass, no direction, you just yourself sit there and somehow allow divine grace, revelationary grace to come and reveal the truth by a process of meditation. That is a process of taking your attention and taking it on a self-examination journey where this internal potential is revealed. So every aspirant, in fact, has their own unique ideal of perfection, because the ultimate is an ideal of perfection. What is God? It's an ideal of perfection that all of us have, regardless of whether we declare ourselves atheists or theists. There is some ideal of perfection towards which we are striving. There's a natural urge. Something is driving us from within toward it. It is perfection itself that is doing it, and pulling us from outside, as it were. And this ideal or unique ideal of perfection might seem vague in the beginning, in the early stages, but as an aspirant progresses in spiritual discipline, you realize more and more the ideal becomes more and more clear and more refined. And the goal and the way that the person chooses toward this goal is what we constitute this Ishta Devata, this chosen ideal. Now, so for the sake of convenience, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna divides aspirants into two broad classes, Sankhya's and the Yogis, and it's another way of saying that the first are eminently fitted for the path of knowledge, and the latter are fitted for the path of action. Now we come then to sacrifice, because can any action be a path of action, and what constitutes a path of action as opposed to just doing something? Now remember, we have outgrown this idea that we are caught in a frustration of pairs of opposites. And when we get out of that, then we realize that there is a path of action. And Krishna's use of the word Sankhya is not the Sankhya philosophy. His use of the word Sankhya is really jnana. So now we're down to jnana yoga and karma yoga. So the wise people, they don't consider that these two paths are really at all distinct from each other, different from each other, for they both lead in due course to total mental purification. That's what we're looking for. And that purification gives us revelation. And the old example would be Patanjali's example about good and bad deeds and other direct causes of transformations. And there we have the simile by commentators on a lake being ruffled by three kinds of waves, when we promote truth and goodness and purity and love and harmony and so on, all of these selfless values, then things become clear and we're able to see the bottom, as it were, the depth of our own being, because there are no ways to disturb anything anymore. So purification leads to revelation. We don't have to deliberately do something to get the revelation, other than just clarifying anything that is disturbing. Much action is there and disturbs our mental equilibrium. It is so common in a fast-paced world to come across people who are suffering from mental stress, anxiety, worry, and so on, only because they are future-orientated and there is no merit in doing any kind of sacrifice which has a selfish aspect to it, a selfish reward. So what would be the real reward of sacrifice? The real reward of sacrifice would be a purification of the mind, which ends up in this revelation. And that really is karma yoga. And if you're doing it as a complete sense of self-sacrifice, both the jnanis and the karma yogis will be doing the same thing. They'll be working for the welfare of all beings. The illumination that arises is, of course, indescribable. It's even unthinkable. And so we won't even go there to see what is the reward, as it were, of it. As soon as we talk about reward or use that word reward, then it becomes an inhibition for us. So now, for the identification with actionless self is put out here in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It makes all activities lose their binding power because all actions have a binding aspect to it. Unbeknown to us, largely speaking, all actions really are binding. All aspects of karma are binding. It is really only when we realize that there is an actionless self within us that all our activities lose this binding path. That is why we call it moksha, or freedom. So there are ancient royal sages like Janaka, for example, who really knew this, and their thoughts and deeds automatically promoted the welfare of the world. They saw inaction in such actions. It's not that they did nothing, they were highly active. There can be nothing more active than in those old days than a king. When we see the records of the king's duties and so on, not a moment's rest. And although he no doubt had ministers around him to advise him on many things, his whole day was fully occupied. There could be nobody more busy than he. Don't complain that you're busy. You're not as busy as King Janaka, and yet King Janaka was a realized sage, was free in this life, or the life he had. But he was automatically doing all his actions for the welfare of the world. These people saw inaction in such actions, and the same internal situation is also brought about by offering all your actions and their results to the indwelling Lord of all. We've mentioned Jnana Yoga, we've mentioned Karma Yoga. People may ask, you already said about the language of worshippers, devotees. What about Bhakti Yoga? Well, can you not do all your actions and dedicate them as a kind of sacrifice, as an offering to all, to the Lord of the universe, whose energy you're using anyway? So, the indwelling Lord of all can be served in this way, and people like this are liberated while still alive. They get their one-way ticket. No point in getting a return ticket. Purchase a one-way ticket only, Most people are afraid of that. Why? Because it is this ego, this self-image, this self-identification that says, I'm going into an abyss. I will lose all meaning. I'll lose my identity. Yes, you do it every night. You lose your entire identity every night. Your passport self is gone the moment you close your eyes. And a number of different versions of you come out in a dream, and all of that collapses in a deep sleep state until you reincarnate, as it were, the following morning. But is it just a blank? Do I really want a blank? Well, it's not exactly a blank, because beyond all of that is what the Mandukya Upanishad refers to as the fourth Turiya, the fourth state. This is a state of pure existence, pure consciousness, and bliss. And Taittiriya Upanishad goes into great, great detail about the different levels of bliss. So even the worst of sinners can approach people and serve them. They can discuss their problems freely and acquire knowledge which will burn up their ignorance. At least that much they can be doing. When the heart is purified by this selflessness, they realize their individual internal self as the self of all beings. And so all of their actions will from there on not taint them. Just like water doesn't taint the lotus leaf or the lotus flower. So when we talk of renunciation, we're talking of sacrificing, if you will, mentally renouncing all actions. Now, there is within the Vedas the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda. The Upanishads fall into the Jnana Kanda, knowledge portion. But the ritualistic portion is there, and then we have to wonder, why? What were all those sacrifices around a fire? What were they doing? And symbolically, when you put some fuel on the fire, it's consumed. And you have to keep putting more on, more on, more on. Now you see, using this fire as a simile, when we put on the fuel of desire, it means that it'll be consumed and we have to add more, add more, add more. And the more we add, the higher the flames become. The more the desire gets nourished. But what were they putting in? They were putting in desire for the welfare of all beings in this world and also in the next. Well, in this world, no doubt, that's fine. We can get every merit from it once we engage in ritualist activities for this purpose, for this world, and also the next. This is what we'll get. But when we study the Katha Upanishad, we see Nachiketa is not satisfied with that. The Nachiketa fire, it's named after him, is not sufficient, because the kind of immortality that is bought, if you will, is not really eternal. It may look like that, but it doesn't give us this freedom. It's not the ultimate. It doesn't give us this final, penultimate understanding, this freedom, this one-way ticket. Nachiketa understands that. What use is heaven is just a post-mortem version of what is here. And so people who have a picture of heaven, let us say, paradise gardens with fountains and beautiful perfumes and all the things, enhanced, heavenly, dreamy aspect of what we have here now. Well, we know that this is actually based on one thing, attachment. And attachment is from delusion. And delusion itself will lead us back to experience time and time again the same thing. So while we can happily enjoy the merits of our lives in a kind of heaven, it's a bit like going on the holiday camp and spending all our hard-earned savings and coming back and doing the whole thing again. So we have to mentally renounce all actions, not actually renounce all actions, but mentally. We have to reallocate them to the real owner. that is the embodied one, who, in the language of both the Bhagavad Gita and Katha Upanishad, rests happily in the body, like an entity, like a ruler in a city. And that ruler never acts, and it doesn't cause any others to act. So wise people look with an equal eye. That's the result. On the wise and the humble, on the animal, on the outcast. It's an even-minded everywhere. When these disciplines are suitably adjusted, the same sightedness can be attained in this very life. In this very life. So all should aim at such perfection, surely. Even we're doing it indirectly, but we should take it out of all the distractions in the highways and the byways, and like an archer, shoot our arrows straight at our target. This has also been highlighted in the Upanishads, the Mundaka Upanishad, using this Om and so on as our target. We shoot our arrow with no mistake. And we have to also understand that we're not alone in this, because the Lord is the friend of all beings. So, this is the 4th chapter. Now there's a whole section, therefore, on all the varieties of what we call sacrifices. This is called yajna. Yajna. So, from the very start, we see Ratasangasya muktasya, one who is unattached, who is free, whose mind is established in knowledge. This is not encyclopedic knowledge. This is knowledge of yourself at depth, your discovered self. So, a person is unattached automatically, who is free, whose mind is established in knowledge. And who performs, by virtue of this, who performs work, in other words, any activities, in this case, not for any egocentric or self-centered reason, but as sacrifices, yajna alone. Then his entire consequences of all his actions, his entire karma, melts away. That's the promise. Yajnaya charataha karma samagram praviliyate. All his karma, all his bad effects are gone. And then the famous prayer that we recite is there. 24th stanza will tell us that if we look for this higher principle, we can see it in the process of offering. We can see it in what is offered. We can see that unity. We can see that it is the highest principle, Brahman, who offers the offering, the sacrifice in that fire of Brahman. And it is that highest principle alone which is attained by the person who sees this in action. Our challenge is therefore to reposition our normal way of thinking, so-called normal way of thinking, and see, if it moves, it's God. And a kind of joke, to do with people in the armies, in the bush and jungle, survival people, taught to survive in extreme conditions. If it moves, eat it. If it doesn't move, eat it. Well, it's the same kind of thing. See, whatever is there, you can see it is the supreme principle dressed up in this way. If we can learn to see no distinction anywhere, or to see these varieties as different aspects of that one thing. Now, when Swami Vivekananda first heard this as a student, he laughed. He thought it was ridiculous. He said, what is this? Cup is Brahman, this table is Brahman, this chair is Brahman, this floor is... Yes. And then he got the inner revelation from within, and everywhere he looked, wherever his eyes settled, he saw this Brahman. So, if you see this in all actions, then you go unto Brahman. Devam eva pare yajnam yoginaha parupasiti. Some practitioners, some who want this revelation, they offer sacrifices to all the various glorious elements. In other words, all the glories. Glories means all the graces emanating from that Supreme in the form of, let us say, subtle elements and ultimately the gross elements. When we talk about the Sankhya philosophy, we can see that there are these 24 categories. That's as far as it goes. We can add a few more, but 24 categories are there. 16 at our sensory levels, that is, organ of information, organ of reaction, the mind itself, and the objects, 5 of them, making a total of 16. Then all egos are there, 17. And then these 5 subtle elements that combine and recombine to make our world, possibly having been discovered by inference only by quantum physicists, namely energetic forces, which the yogi can see with yogic insight, no doubt. Uselessly and unfortunately translated as earth and water and fire and air and space or matter, but ultimately coming from, this is the important thing, like rays, if you were, emanating from the cosmic sun called cosmic mind. That is what we call God. That is the one that we are worshipping. So some people worship these emanations, which are called devas alone, while others will offer the self itself as sacrifice in the fire of Brahman alone. So one is for the worshippers, and one is for those who register only the divine self, seeing the self in all things, in all beings. So these are 2 paths that are laid out. Then some will offer hearing and other senses as oblations in the fire of restraint. In other words, the sacrificing, hearing, things like gossip is a good thing. Things like, now most of the news is a kind of gossip that we hear today in today's media. I'm not criticizing the information channels and all that. What I'm saying is that no news is good news, it seems. We're always looking for something other than that. The good news stories are not publishable. Why? Because there's no demand for them. We are intrinsically, seemingly pessimistic people who thrive on bad news. So, offering hearing, sense of hearings, and other senses, refusing to listen to any that is not useful, helpful, and that is not dedicated in many ways to this pursuit of freedom. And so they offer it into the fire of restraint. You see the image of a sacrifice into a fire. When we say Brahma Purnam, Brahma Havi, and so on, we are imagining that it is the digestive fire. The Lord of digestive fire is sitting there within, managing everything nicely, and we are offering with the divine hand, divine food, everything registered to that one account. And he who sees that in all actions, they goes on to that Brahman. And others will offer sound and other sense objects as oblations in the fire of the senses. Others again, sarvani indriya karmani prana karmani chapare. Others will offer their actions, the actions of the senses and the functions of the vital energy as offerings in the fire of self-control, kindled by knowledge. You restrain all your energetic outlets, absolutely, all the functions of the vital energy that you have. You restrain that in the fire of self-control, and all of us require it. And then others will sacrifice gifts of wealth. You have sufficient wealth that is sufficient for your needs. Any surplus, you are generous enough to give it away. So now, so far, we have dealt with individual management, and now we're saying, what about possessive management? The things that you own, you can give that away. And then there's austerity and there's yoga. And even others, their sacrifices of self-denial, rigid vows, increasing your willpower, strengthening that, and making sure that you're on track by taking serious, rigid vows. In the Christian world, of course, everyone takes these kinds of vows for Lent, but it's a kind of standard joke that we don't really take it that seriously, not as people used to. And then, of course, rigid vows, sacrifice through scriptural study and knowledge, all of these kinds of things. So even scriptural knowledge can be a sacrifice. Because if there's any egocentricity about it, it will say, I know and you don't. I'm wise and you're a fool. See how it goes. And others also, apane yuvati pranam prane, pranam yata pare, offer the outgoing breath as oblation into the incoming breath as you breathe. Supposing in meditation you sit and you're aware of the incoming and outgoing breath, and you're saying, okay, I'm offering this. You can see there's a synergy about it. And in any event, what are you doing? You're registering it to the divine, like a cosmic ocean, breathing in and breathing out. And restraining the flow of the outgoing and the incoming breaths. This is constantly practicing pranayama, or regulation of the vital energy. It's not the regulation of breath, it's the regulation of vital energy. And then another variation would be put like this. Others regulating their food, offer the pranas, in the pranas, the function of this. All these are knowers of yajna, having their sins consumed by sacrifice. In other words, the bottom line is, everybody requires in spiritual life to make a sacrifice. And it's to make a sacrifice in such a way that we don't regret it, we don't commiserate about, what's wrong with you today? You look so unhappy. No, I'm fasting. Okay, if you're fasting, you should keep quiet about it. Don't tell anybody. And put on a face so that people will ask, you see, well, you look very serious today. What's the problem? Oh, I'm fasting. Or boasting, I gave so much away today. Well, in reality, you gave nothing away. You're still clinging on to that. And all the effects, the egoistic effects that go with it. So eating the nectar, the remnant of sacrifice, they go to the eternal Brahman. In other words, whatever you're offering, you take the small remnants of it. It's not that you fast unto death, like Buddha did in his early phase of so-called spiritual discipline. Fast until your skeleton, your ribs are visible. That's the portrayal of it. Instead of doing that, no, you don't do that. You offer the vast portion, if you like, to God. Now, this is the key to what we call prasad. Prasad, the Lord takes the subtle portion of it. We take the remaining portion of it behind. So what is the result of this? What is the merit of all of this? It's very, very clear that we go onto the eternal Brahman. Vidyashishtamrita bhujyo yanti brahma sanatanam. We go to the eternal Brahman. This world, yam lokastya yajnasya kuto nyakuro sattama. This world, sattama, this world is not for the sacrificer. Kuru sattama, that is, O best of the Kurus. This world is not for the non-sacrificer. How then the other world? So, if you have wasted your life, if you're not sacrificing something in this world, willingly doing it, and doing it without any understanding of, I'll get merit from it. Anyway, various sacrifices, such as what we have mentioned here, these are laid down in the storehouse of the Veda, and we can see that they are born of action. And knowing this, don't renounce action. Knowing this, make all actions sacrificing. Knowing all of this, you will be free. Nyatva vimokshasi. Then knowledge sacrifice is superior to sacrifice performed with material objects. And all action without exception culminates in knowledge. So this is what kind of knowledge? And we know that this is the higher knowledge. So there's a little bit about that subject, which I touched on Saturday in terms of sacrifice. It was really an answer to a question, but I felt we had to explore the subject from the point of view of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which specifically deals with this particular subject. All right, so that's a few minutes still to go. I wonder if there are any questions about it or about anything else. We have about 5 minutes or something still. Yes.
What if human was a huge experience, or we were, as human, being like some experimental beings on this earth? For my studies, that's what it's appearing, really. I know I'm not really precise, but I kind of have a hint that you might know what I mean.
Well, you see, some dualists might think that we are here as a part of an experiment, and some conspiracists might actually have a theory that we are the experimental rats for aliens, something like that. But if we come down to earth a little bit, I don't think God is experimenting with us and pushing us around. This is not our understanding in Vedanta. That is based on very, very thorough self-analysis, very, very precise self-analysis that the Upanishads do, and also our own experience through spiritual practice, meditation, and so on. I don't think that you will see, let us say, a Ramana Maharshi, a realized soul, saying, I was an experiment. But did they themselves experiment? I don't know if that's your question. Anyway, yes, we have to take this unit, psychophysical unit, and we have to, with a certain sense of enthusiasm and curiosity, understand what it's all about. And at a very, very basic level, we don't. That is why we have to go to a physiologist or a doctor who will explain to us things that we don't understand about our own human body. But actually, our human body as an instrument, surely we should understand it as much as possible, given the fact that we have the opportunity to be educated in it. And then in terms of the mind, we are always looking at the mind. So physiology was one thing, psychology was another, But beyond psychology is spirituality. Beyond the mind is the spirit. And the spirit is not subject to anything. It's not an object. It is a subject. It's the eternal subject. To discover that really is the meaning of life. Now, experimentally, yes. When I was probably about 15, I decided that my cultural background, religious background, might not be as reliable as I thought it was. So I started investigating, probing every kind of practice. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna did it intensively in great, great detail. I didn't, but I did it in my own way to find out the merits or demerits of every single diverse spiritual practice and religion I could think of. And ultimately, that led me to a kind of divinely guided person who came into my life, and I'm sitting here now. So we may think that we're alone in our experimentation, but we are not. Because experimentation is a thought movement, sometimes accompanied by physical action, but primarily it's a thought movement. And that thought movement goes to the very source of thought itself that we call cosmic mind. And this cosmic mind gives us exactly what we're looking for. We call this divine grace. Worshippers, devotees will call this divine grace flowing toward us. The grace of the cosmic mind is always there, radiating, and is there, made from pure love, and there we are responding to it. If we block it, of course, is like blocking the sun by putting shutters on a window and asking, what happened to the sun? No, open the shutters and you'll find it. So the movement of opening the shutters, however, is necessary. Now, what kind of shutters can be part of an experimentation as long as we don't use it as a delaying factor? In other words, our curiosity deviates our mind from the central purpose of our life. We should not really allow that to happen. I'm not sure if I did or didn't answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you for your point of view.
Well, we can leave it there then. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be on all. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji. That was very helpful.